How's it going, everyone? This is Dixon of the Ultimate Gamer. I'm logging on. Today I want to go over about why was I limited to consoles back in the 90's? Why I couldn't play PC games in the 90's? Well, first of all, I was actually still in my youth, mainly throughout my teen years, and since I was already into the gaming world on the Sega Genesis during the 16-bit wars. Well, actually, it started with the NES days, though. I mean, my sister had the NES, and then I got my first game console. Well, it was actually the Game Boy back in Christmas in '91. Then I got my first video game console in '93, which was the Sega. I mean, Christmas in '93, which was the Sega Genesis. Then I got a Super Nintendo phone. Then about over a year and a half on my birthday, then traded in for a Sega CD add-on. So I decided the 16-bit war. I chose the Sega Genesis. Of course, you all know that. Basically, it's in between the generation of the 16-bit and the 32 64-bit generation, which was the Sony PlayStation, the Sega Saturn, and Nintendo 64. Of course, I chose my two favorite consoles from both eras to be pictured here. But I couldn't play PC games back in the 90's. Why is that? One, our family didn't have a computer. We didn't get our first computer until 1998, which is a compact serial. Well, my dad bought it, and he mainly bought it for businesses like stock markets and other bookkeeping stuff. That's pretty much what he was into until, sadly, the multiple sclerosis hit him in 2000. Then it pretty much lost the ability to do any of that. But during '98, there is one game that came with the compact stereo, and that was the first Moto Racer game. That was a game I can play on it, though. It's the only game I can play on it, though, that would allow me to play. Besides basic games like Solitaire or Minesweeper and all that. However, he always played Solitaire and on that quite a bit when he had some casual time on hand. Kind of helps things too, at times too. And of course, computers were more expensive back in the day and more complex, especially to run games on. If you were like running through DOS, you had to type in a bunch of commands and all that shit. And I tinkered around with some of the DOS box games that weren't on digital distributions or weren't pre-configured. And sometimes they can be a hit and miss, pain in the ass to deal with. You got to type in some fucking commands, and sometimes CD-ROMs, DOS-box games can be a little bit more difficult than the regular 3.5 floppy disk games can. Well, I actually got a little bit into the DOS-box gaming when I like in the mid 2000 on my second computer. I got my first personal computer back in 2004 after following year after I graduated from high school after my held back years. That is, I was supposed to graduate in 2000, but that didn't happen. That's a long story. However, computers gotten more cheaper and games gotten more easier to install on the system since then, with the exception of the old games run on the new ones, unless you have to have a certain setup, like a DOS box emulator or something. I learned about emulations on my, I think it was on my second computer when I got that. Yeah, computer games were more complex for me back in the '90's. I mean, basically for anybody pretty much back then. I mean, I've been hearing friends that actually had computers and had computer games on it. Many people, there were people my age back then that actually were into computer gaming and actually had more knowledge of playing games on the computer. Me, I always been in a special ed program, so I wasn't really too keen on knowledge at the time. But there were some games of course, when I first heard about certain computer games, I actually heard about Doom and Wolfenstein and all that, and I've been strict to playing console games, and I finally played the games on the console, starting with the Super Nintendo, which my friend had a Super Nintendo, and I had a Super Nintendo for the short period of time, and my friend's dad gotten both Wolfenstein 3D and Doom games on it, and I borrowed them a few times, and even though they weren't as good as the PC ports, but they were still what they were back then. Of course, when I got my PlayStation, I actually got Doom on that one. And when I got an N64, I got Doom 64 on that one. Well, they were fun. They're definitely fun memories back then when it comes to console gaming. But there's a lot of them I missed out on, like PC exclusives. For instance, Rise of the Triad is one of them, which was supposed to be a sequel to Wolfenstein 3D. It used an advanced Wolfenstein 3D engine, and never had a console release, and that was one of the games I wanted to play back then. Of course, years later, I played the digital distribution, Good Old Games version of it, along with another PC exclusive, Blood. But nowadays they actually had remaster versions of those games. Of course, I did a remaster version of Blood about 4 years ago, which is a flesh to play pack. And they recently released a remaster version of Rise of the Triad, the Ludicrous Edition. Right now on the PCs, but coming to the consoles later on this year, I believe. Making its first console release. Interesting. I mean, it's not just first-person shooter games that were exclusive or superior on the PC, but there were other games I saw in the PC magazine one time, like full motion video games like 7 Guess or 11th Hour. Well, there was a CDI version of that game, but CDI consoles are a different story. But mainly, but plus side about playing games like that these days, though, you can play them you can buy them digitally on digital distribution with pre-configured DOSBox settings. Plus, you can tweak around the settings if you're not satisfied. That's pretty interesting. I mean, there's even better things about those games. There's some of them that actually got remastered, like the anniversary edition of 7th Guest, for instance. And as I mentioned, Blood for Flesh Supply and release of Rise of the Triad, Ludicrous Edition. There were also re-releases of Doom 1 and 2 and Quake. Hopefully there'll be a re-release of Wolfenstein as remaster, with a remaster touch like the other Ed games. Yeah, and there's a lot of them that I'm hoping they actually do get remastered for better 4K quality. Games like D, for instance, which they did had a console release. They released it on digital distribution for PC a few years back, but they need to remaster that game. That would be awesome, because the graphics and the pixels don't really hold up. It was a full motion, kind of like full motion animation type of game, but graphics don't hold up for that one. What else? Yeah, and also in that PC magazine, when I was looking at, there were actually advertisements for adult games back then. It was back in '95 when I looked at the PC magazine. I had a crush on a lot of games, not just first-person shooter or full-motion video games like 7 Guess or any of the Tex Murphy games like Under a Killing Moon that looks badass. But there were some certain adult games, because I always been a dirtball when it comes to that sort of thing, and in a way I still am, to be honest with you, when it comes to that sort of thing. Because I'm not always a clean gamer. But at the time. Yeah. And what else? Yeah, just that things were limited for me back in the '90s, where I have to stick to console gaming, because I mean they had a good variety of games on consoles, but PC gaming but the PC gaming or Mac gaming had awesome computer games as well. Of course, when I was in middle school, I played SimCity 2000 on a Mac, and of course there was also a PC version, as well as another interesting game called Gadget. Totally an underrated game. I was playing that on the Mac, and hopefully they also have a PC version of that one, plus an updated version of that one that was released about 4 years later after the original release. I hope they re-release the games on digital distribution. Well, anyway, back in the 90's, where I was in my teens, and before that, I was only limited to console gaming, unless if I'm like in the school or in a class during free time, playing the computer games that are kind of like educational or mind thinking subject like SimCity 2000 and all that. But that is what it is. I didn't get into PC gaming until 2004. And I'm still into PC gaming mainly over consoles these days. And I always will look back on the retro games. Hopefully the more retro games that get a proper remaster, the better. That's pretty much all I gotta say. Thank you all very much for watching and listening. This is Dixon of the Ultimate Gamer Room logging off.